Voilà. A step in the evolution of a library. Obviously, it's not a step in the evolution of any library. It's something that you have to want. You have to have a need for an evolution and for a rethinking of either who you are working for as library or what you are. And that was something that we needed to do as the United Nations Library. We're a very old library. We just celebrated 100 years this year, actually, because we started in 1919 with the League of Nations, which started in London and then it came to Geneva. And our building is very old. It stems also from the 1930s. So we needed to reconfigure ourselves. We said, okay, what is traditional library services? What does it still mean today? Any diplomat that comes to us is like, well, I can Google that much faster than anything else. And I think we all have the same issues if it's students or anybody else. So we decided to do projects in addition to our library services. So the Knowledge and Learning Commons is one of these initiatives that we took in order to advance anything that's called library services within that as well. We started this project with the UNOC Center for Learning and Multilingualism. UNOC means the United Nations Office in Geneva. And we have this Center for Learning and Multilingualism. I'm only going to say CLM because it gets much too fast otherwise. CLM is a training center that's there for UN staff and diplomats as well. They provide training in the 6 official languages of the UN. Anybody can participate in that. Staff and diplomats don't have to pay for that. So we all receive training on that on a regular basis on languages. But then they also hold management training. So when you want to start with the Commons, that was for us the ideal partner actually, because it would kind of feel like a wheel, you know. You start with information resources and then you have somebody that you come to the users, you have events, you do sharing, you share the knowledge, and you come back on the wheel with the trainers and the learning, and it feeds straight into that. And actually what had happened until then, until like 2 years ago, we had hardly any contact with training and learning at the UN. We were purchasing some books for them, and that was about it. So at the United Nations, just like I think in many organizations, there are lots of silos actually. And we've been having a Director General for the last 5 years. He just finished his mandate, and we have a new Director General now, so we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But this is going to keep existing. But he had a lot of ideas about breaking up silos, about collaborating, about new ways of working, flexible ways of working, and especially also about reaching out to the public. So this is our library. You can see over there, this is the actual building. So has anybody ever been to the Palais des Nations? No? Yes, you have? And I thought I remember your face, but I'm not quite sure. Okay, great. Well, this is one wing of the Palais des Nations. So the entire library actually exists. No, let's put it this way. The Palais des Nations exists because of the library, because we were donated by John D. Rockefeller in 1928. And there was a big competition, architectural competition for the new building of the League of Nations. And John D. Rockefeller donated in 1927. He said he was going to. In 1928, the money arrived. The money for a library. But where they had actually planned to do it was on the lakeside, and there was not enough space there. So the city of Geneva had to come up with another terrain. And the concours, the competition actually was kind of nixed because nothing actually fulfilled the requirements for a library. They hadn't even thought of a library, actually, the League of Nations, neither for archives, obviously. So everything was redone. Le Corbusier could not get his big project in. And the Palais des Nations was created as some kind of compromise out of 5 different architectural proposals. And it's like a horseshoe, and one side of the horseshoe is library, the entire side of that. We have 5 stories in there for offices and 10 stories of stacks, which are in the back in there. Voila, and so this is the picture of the team today. Most of the team, we're about 50 people usually. And it concerns not only library service, as you can see. We also have an institutional memory section. So we also organize the archives And we manage the archives, the League of Nations archives, and the United Nations archives today as well. So that also means that we do records management, advisory functions, and all that comes with it. A big chunk of what we have in archives is human rights. So human rights is obviously one of the issues that is very much demanded for and that we actively purchase for as well on the library side. So there's an institutional memory section. I think about 1/3 of the staff works in archives and records management. And then we have a cultural diplomacy and outreach section. That's I'm still right now head of that section as well, and I'm also head of the library services section. And cultural diplomacy and outreach means that we're organizing a lot of events that are cultural activities, exhibitions, film festivals, performances, anything that happens at the Palais. The missions bring their culture to the United Nations. They want to share their culture with the other member states, and we help them organize that. So there are many events that happen like that. And then outreach, of course, means it's mainly outreach from the library. So we do outreach. We have a series of events. We started that about 10 years ago, and we came up to about 35 events a year, which we call the library talks. So it's not library science talks, but it's library talks. And library talks deal with any of the UN key issues. So we have, it's usually political issues. It could be right now on SDGs, for example, is one of the biggest issues right now. SDGs is Sustainable Development Goals. I don't know even how to say that in German. Agenda 2030, it's easier. But this is, it basically permeates anything that you do on a global level. So you can find it within a target under one of the goals, right? So when we have book launches, we have a book launch on the economy of China, for example, then we try to add that to one of the SDGs and to bring out that aspect. So we invite different people that will talk. There will be one person who will present the book, and then other people, somebody from the UN, a diplomat usually as well, and somebody from academia or from an NGO, from a non-governmental organization, will give their points of view about that subject as well. So this is the series of the library talks, and it was very, very successful, actually. And it gave us this, let's say, this status as the outreach center for the UN in Geneva, actually. So the library had already changed within the 10 years of including this events management part as well. And yesterday I was asked by an academic, so you're an event manager? No, I'm a librarian. But it fits in, right? It fits. It all comes together. Voila. And then, of course, there's the knowledge and learning commons, but there's a whole presentation that comes after that. But I thought I'd show you a little bit first about this library and how the knowledge and learning commons then fits into this context and what makes it so special. So these are just pictures because I think it's easier to talk instead of just having some text. Voila, so here you have the archives reading room on the very top there. That's the archives reading room. We put in these tacky green lamps so that you know it's an archives reading room. You don't have those in the library reading rooms, even though they look just like that. So voila, that's archives. These are part of our stacks. It's our new Director General, the first woman Director General, and we're still very proud of that. This is our main entrance area. So I mentioned before we do have a little problem actually of what they call in French signalétique. It is, even though we're a whole wing of the Palais des Nations, the main entrance to the library is difficult to find because it's on the first floor. And access to the library only comes from the rez-de-chaussée, so Erdgeschoss, and the third floor. And but the main entrance is on the first floor, so people are not quite sure which elevator to take and which not to take, because this building out of the 1930s also has back ways. It has stairs where you don't expect them with bathrooms in there. So, voila. But in the end, usually people do find that. So right now we're working with some students on possibly improving access to that as well. But then once you're in it, you know, right? Because this is it's a nice entrance. We have a lot of space there. This is usually where we then keep our receptions. And to the right of this, so you come in basically like that, like this here. And then on the right side, you have this room here, this is our library events room. And that's the other pictures you saw earlier with the 100 in the back. That's the other side of the room. And so this room used to be our loans and catalog room. In the very old days, they used to hold meetings in there, because back then already the library actually was a center for getting people together to discuss in a more informal way. Everything at the United Nations is extremely formal, obviously, because diplomacy requires protocol, it requires forms. And that's the only place, and we have the confirmation from a High Commissioner of Human Rights for that. The only place where you can feel, you can talk, just as it comes, out of your mouth. It's, to a certain extent, I would assume, because they remain diplomats. And when you talk about human rights, you cannot just say anything either. But it has a very warm ambience. I don't know if it comes across with this picture that great. There's this painting in the back. It's called The Dream of Peace. The Dream of Peace, it's from 1937. A Norwegian painter actually brought it all the way from Norway in 1939 through Nazi Germany, as I say, on a train with his son, and put it up there because he was such a strong believer in peace, So there is a whole lot of history that's behind it, a lot of anecdotes that come out, and when you come into the room, you have a feeling that, this is a center of knowledge and a center also of a peace culture. So that's what we try to also convey through the types of events that we have, is that this is the actual goal of the United Nations, is the maintenance or the creation of peace. And many times this is forgotten because it gets bogged down in technical issues as well, or in some meetings where everybody has to make statements. So for the Library Talks, one of our slogans is no statements. People, they always try to come in with something written. No. And no PowerPoints. Or if you have a PowerPoint, only images. Because otherwise it becomes political, and you have, 30 other meeting rooms for that. That's not the place. And the library is really a space for intellectual exchange. Voilà. Up there is a picture of a cultural activity. It's also, for example, fashion shows, things like that. There was a fashion show that was organized by the Economic Commission for Europe with the sustainable clothing, so things that were made out of trees, tree barks and so on, and they are very, very nice things. And what it does, though, it also has an effect on our work, obviously, because we do feel much closer to that side of the United Nations, the one that's more open, the one where, there are many, many receptions. Basically, you could eat at a reception almost every day, because there are more than 100 events, cultural activities a year at the Palais des Nations that we organize. But it also helps us to create this network and to talk about our library as well, and to talk about the intellectual side of things. And that fits much better with the cultural side as well, and people are more willing to discuss that at that point. Voilà. And then just something, I would love to organize a visit, from Zurich to the Palais des Nations. One of the other perks that we have is actually the UN Museum. We manage the UN Museum there. It used to be called the League of Nations Museum, and you can still see that on top. This is the entrance to the museum. And we just opened up a new exhibition because we're celebrating the 100 years of multilateralism. And I would like to know, who of you knows what multilateralism means? Do you? It's a difficult term. We had a discussion the other day, a public discussion at the Geneva University, and the moderator could not once pronounce the word correctly. I also have a problem with it. It's not easy. But basically what it means is international collaboration through a formal way, so through a governmental way, between governments. That's usually what multilateralism stands for. So the United Nations right now, we're in very much a quest for redefining multilateralism. Actually, for some of our events, I didn't use the term at all anymore. We just used international collaboration, because it opens us up also for different ways of interaction. For example, through social media. If you might be aware of that, the SDGs, the Agenda 2030 was actually created like this. There was a whole campaign online, and people could vote. Anybody could have their opinion, and everybody's opinion counted. Because it was written down, it was included in some meetings. All the NGOs, accredited NGOs, I think there are at least 500, could participate in the deliberations on what should this agenda up to 2030 be like, and what should it be about, and what are the targets, what's important about that. So this is very much how we as United Nations see ourselves. Even though when you go back to our charter, it still defines us as working, as governments working together. But governments also are nowadays reaching out, as you see Mr. Trump, I guess, as well, you know, to individuals through social media. They're reaching out in different ways. And the United Nations at the same time has to evolve and go in that direction as well. Voilà. So this exhibition brings us back to the very beginnings. We have, for example, back then, at the League of Nations, it was a depository, the library was a depository of all the multilateral treaties. So you have, for example, a convention on slavery, you have the first convention on terrorism back then, you have the first convention against oil pollution of the seas. All that already happened in the League of Nations. And I always say, you know, that was one of some of the best times that I had in the archives, actually, when I worked there, because I discovered that nothing is new, but that progress has been made. A lot of progress has been made. There was the first disarmament conference in 1933. And of course, there were many, many women that were participating back then, also in pacifist organizations and so on. And things always come back, you know. But we have evolved, and we are working on avoiding the next big conflict, you know. There is definitely hope for that as well. Voilà, so you can see some of the documents that are there. And of course, we have the Nobel Peace Prizes as well, because Kofi Annan received the last one for us, and so it was donated actually half to him and half to all the staff. So we were all extremely happy when we received that as well. But there are also older ones. The first High Commissioner for Refugees I think he started his work in 1924. Fridtjof Nansen, a Norwegian, he received a Nobel Peace Prize as well. And then we have one from an Austrian pacifist. So we put all these things in this exhibition. Back then, the League of Nations incorporated everything that's now the UN system. So for example, we had a health section that organized vaccination campaigns, and they eradicated smallpox. These are things that you would never expect, right? Why, you know, that these big multilateral organizations actually, they go into the field, and there's a lot of technical work there as well. And so we try to bring this out and show how this contributes to peacemaking. And that is a really important part of peacemaking, and that no matter what happens on a political level, the technical, this technical work and collaboration needs to continue. So I'm inviting you to come and look at our new exhibition. It's really fantastic. At the same time, you should go to the Budme Institute. They have an exhibition on guerre et paix. And we did these exhibitions together, actually. They're accompanying each other as well. So the United Nations Library, I just thought I'd give you a couple of statistics about what we are. So you see, we're definitely not the biggest library, obviously. In 2018, we had, so up there, this is basically more accesses and beneficiaries, and down here, this is holdings. So you see, we have about 1,500,000 volumes, and that's print books and serial items and all that together. But we have about 4 million UN documents in print. And of course, the printing of documents has now completely ceased, actually. So now they're all electronically available, and I think there are hundreds created every day. This all makes it for about 46 kilometers of stacks. And we always say it's between Geneva and Lausanne. And then that's what people remember. That's a nice one, right? So we only have about 70 databases. I'm sure you have way, way more than we do. We have all the important ones. Obviously, anything that pertains to law for us is very important. So these are just some of the facets around multilateralism. We do consider ourselves one of the important law libraries, especially on international law, obviously, because we do have all the documents. We have the International Law Commission that comes and has the sessions at the Palais des Nations. So we have the direct links with these experts, with these judges. And then, of course, we have a very big collection of domestic law as well. We have collections just like you probably as well. Just the other day, somebody came to film, and he wanted me to show the law collection of Persia. Okay. I mean, for us, as librarians, we're like, okay, it's not so useful. I would love to talk about the commons, but no. The building and everything is so fantastic, and he needed to bring out the historic side. So it's also a matter of marketing. And then, of course, I played the game so that we could be on that little film in Le Mans Express. But it is definitely a very large collection that we have in our stacks. Anything else is economics, And of course, international economics is the focus again. Any kind of social issues, because this is what the United Nations is dealing with. When you're dealing with trade and development, you're going into children, work trafficking children and women and these kinds of things. And of course, development issues are always social issues as well. International relations, anything that's political, and environment, of course, has become much more important. In Geneva, you have an office that's like a branch of the United Nations Environment Program as well. They have a documentation center, and we do collaborate a little bit, as much as we can, with the documentation center, but we are actively having acquisitions for anything that's environmental topics. Voilà, so in 2018 we had 1 million online accesses, and a lot of that also goes for archives now because of the digitization project, and that goes up like radically. So it's definitely proof the more you put online, digitized, full text, nice, searchable, the more accesses you have. You can't go wrong with that. And but only about 30,000 printed items were loaned or used, and about 50,000 archival files were consulted. These also, that increased a lot because of the digitization project. So people are interested more again in anything that's print as well. Right? We have about 38,000 beneficiaries, and here are again our main users. So it's diplomats and conference delegates, UN staff, and then external researchers, because as we're one of the only libraries, as far as I know, actually we're the only one that is open to the public. And that's our mandate. That's what John D. Rockefeller wrote. Okay, I give you this, but it's because you're supposed to be a center for research and an instrument of international understanding. So that is really our motto, has been since then. And if you want to be a center for international understanding, you need to get people into your premises as well, and you need to have direct contact with them. You cannot remain in the UN bubble, as many other services stay as well. Voilà. And then you see, in comparison to these fairly low figures, we organized 115 events with 17,000 participants in 1 year. And that's a very typical year. And sometimes it can go up to 150 actually as well. And we're not counting what we call side events, which we only facilitate, because there are about 50 more a year as well. So basically we have a very large events team. And that helps me to jump into the commons, because that was very easy actually to create a place for a space for collaboration and exchange. We already had the space. You saw the events room. It had just been renovated. We invested a little bit of money, and then because we started this partnership with the training center, they said, oh, we have some screens, we have this or that. So synergies were already there, and on the budgetary level, of course, we really reinforced each other. And that happened in this room. And this room is now equipped with anything that you need for organizing really nice multi-functional events. You can have a panel discussion in the back. You can have the working groups at the same time. And all that with a very nice acoustic actually, and all the kind of the IT equipment that you need as well. So we had the space, and I think a commons. And that's actually why I'm doing this presentation about a commons, because the commons replies to several of the issues that a lot of libraries are facing. The commons is not a new concept. It was already discussed about 30 years ago, right? Yesterday, actually, one of the librarians told me, oh, she's a Canadian. Oh, when I started in library school, the library school was part of the learning commons already. Okay, so that was 20 years ago. And we're so I'm not saying this is the most fantastic and new initiative, but it's definitely a unique initiative in international organizations, and it's a unique initiative for an international organization library, to bring together a partnership for creating spaces that everybody should use. When in our organizations things are extremely hierarchical and in silos, and then at the same time. So coming back to why I'm doing this presentation, it responds to many needs that we have nowadays. When we manage our libraries, first of all, it's always a budgetary issue. I'm assuming, I don't know, maybe the Swiss are different, because sometimes the Swiss are different. But in most libraries, there are reductions, budgetary reductions, and it just keeps going and going and going. And for us, it's been like this for many years. Every year, again, the budget proposal has to come with 5% less to begin with, and then there are more cuts and more cuts. So creating synergies with another, with a partner or with other partners actually helps you to reduce your expenses, and it it helps use the same human resources, for example. It brings the capacities together as well. So that was there from the very beginning. We knew that this was going to be a great fit, but we didn't know how it was going to work out. The other need that we had was to justify our existence in general, because we had an extremely unfriendly takeover trial for a takeover a few years ago from a research institute. And at the United Nations, there are always issues with budgeting. If you budget it from a regular budget or from extra budgetary, what you call extra budgetary funds, where you have to do a whole lot of more marketing in order to get funds. So we are a fixed part of the budget proposal, a regular budget proposal. So we would always have a regular budget. So if you merge that with extra budgetary, for example, there is always a risk of losing that budget for other things. Let's say our communications events post could go for some other institute's communication post, right? So we had a concrete need to justify that this communication needs to be done within the library. It should not be done within a research institute, for example. This is really a library work, and it's useful for your organization. It will help you achieve the goals better. And then there was another need, was obviously to bring in people into our spaces, because as you've seen, the spaces are large. And of course, users coming in person are going down because we're providing way more and very interesting and current information online, just like any library does. So the Commons also fulfills that requirement. It brings in people into the library, and it's not, you don't have to make anything up. You create events that are useful for these people, for their learning needs. They fulfill the learning needs of your primary clients. So what people say about us now is, okay, what is the Commons for? It's for alternative learning. They realize that. Because like I explained before, the CLM provides more the formal learning, it's classroom learning, or it's online learning as well. And this is alternative learning. One of the more original ideas, for example, is the language tandems. So we invite people, for the first time we invite them to one of our nicer spaces that are more, they're more informal. Let's say we have spaces with just armchairs. And we invite a French and an English speaker native to speak together. And all that is facilitated, though, from the coaches, the professionals from the training center. So you have the space, and then you can provide at the same time the resources. We give them the dictionaries if they want to. They can have it online, the access like that. So we provide an integrated solution for these kinds of learning events. The Commons is a facilitator and broker of collaboration across the UN system. And we have seen a lot of that because we started with this one partner, the training center. Training center is part of our human resources management service. And the chief of that service especially was very interested in supporting this idea because she immediately saw the opportunities that there were, for example, in getting out her messages. If there are messages about, performance appraisal, a new performance appraisal system, you can now come and have a learning event at the Commons. You don't have to organize it yourself. You have the space already as well, and you can do it in such a way that it's much more interactive. There's not just one person standing here but that it becomes more interactive, that people want to ask more questions, that maybe it's actually a more efficient type of exchange or training for that. So with HR, and you see that afterwards, there's another big service, a big division actually of ours, which is the conference management division. And they have innovation initiatives, let me put it this way. They are constantly rethinking about the way they're doing things. For example, printing. Do we print? If we still print, how do we print? They want to do things a bit more environmentally friendly. They want to have better meeting facilities, better IT tools for the conference delegates that come from Nepal, and tomorrow they have to speak and they have to have all the documents ready and possibly in, I don't know which language, how to present that. So they're constantly rethinking that, and they have a whole innovation team actually, and an innovation challenge. And they saw the Commons also as an opportunity to to do these sorts of events, meetings. They hold actual staff meetings as well in this space, because it allows for a different interaction. And innovation really is the key. That's one of the key adjectives that I would say that a commons brings. It brings out a lot of ideas, and that, I think that's also one statement from, actually the guy that said that, he's a legal advisor for HR. And he says, I can bring fresh ideas and have a space to gain experiences. So he himself feels this way. He moderates as well. We have a lot of events in the Commons that are, for example, on facilitation, conflict resolution, negotiation, and so on, because these are the issues that big organizations have, obviously. So for that, we will then propose, for example, bring in also the ombudsman. We have an ombudsman, or the staff counselor's office, or the medical service, depending on what it is. Just the other day, we had Expo Santé, they call it, from the medical service, where they brought in medical professionals from all over the region, and they take your pulse, they do all the kinds of things that you need to get, almost like a checkup. And then they tell you, and now you should go and see this professional. And it's just so much friendlier in our space, right? And we're really catering for that. We make sure that they feel that this is a commons, because that's where the word comes from, right? Commons comes from common, so it's a common space, and it's a space for communities. So it's actually a space that is for the communities that are already existing, but it also creates new communities. Because by now, for example, we have a community that we started with out in the beginning. They just came from New York. They're called Young UN. The Young UN are not that young, obviously. They go up to 35. But this is young for an international civil servant. Eh? So they have a lot of ideas. But they needed partners also to figure out who can we address, and how can we, when we have ideas, who can we approach to get things, to get things moving, to change things. How can we have a say? How can we have decision-making possibilities as well? So we help them get into some kind of networks. We, in the very beginning, only given like a little spaces, what they wanted for some meetings. And then we invited them to our events to be either a panelist or to be moderating as well. And more and more, actually, they were so much included that our Director General back then, he just loved this idea. And they became a fixture now, actually. It's part of the Director General's office, is somebody who works with Young UN, so with these young people. And they're using the Commons just on a regular basis. And these younger people, they don't think about it anymore. So, okay, a service is there, I don't question why. And that's exactly where we want to get to, is that people don't question anymore why they should be coming there. It's just, okay, I need to have a little discussion with my supervisor in a friendly way, because we're also managing up. Huh? I don't know if you have that, but we have that, managing up. I invite him to the Commons, voila. And that's what people are already starting to do. So the synergies and efficiencies, I already brought them out. UN agendas, perception change was high on the agenda of our Director General back then, so it fit in directly with that as well. It's perception change within, because what the Director General's office had done is reaching out to International Geneva on what is the United Nations, right? It's all about the perception that you have of the United Nations. I mean, the Charter says we the peoples, but it's also about people, about an individual as well. So the perception change was trying to explain to individuals, this is what the UN does in your daily life. We are, for example, working on infrastructure, the road systems, within Europe and all that. This is all the type of work that the United Nations does. So they bring out a lot of communication material about that. And what we do kind of feeds in with that, because we're now doing this on the inside. Our own UN staff often was a bit detached as well. If you are working in your own little office, you don't really see what effect it has on the world. You very often could get a bit depressed, obviously. But so these kinds of events, they bring people together and to share. And they can also voice their opinions, even difficult ones. Actually, I went to an event last week. It was on conflict resolution, and the idea. People were actually sharing their conflicts while the chief of HR was right there, while their supervisors were probably also in the room, or other colleagues. But people feel free to talk about that, to share the experiences as well, also the difficult ones. Voilà. So UN agendas, perception change and innovation, that's something that drives the Commons. The building blocks were already there. We had this whole events management team. I supervised, I think it was about 4 people who were actually fixed on events management in general, and then we work with a lot of interns. And they get contracts for up to 6 months. And they change things on an ongoing basis. And that's actually one of the advantages as well, is to really have these young people that come in and they will renovate all your communication material from the last week. But it'll always be new. There'll always be something different to say. They will have a different point of view. So that means also we can gain different users as well. We don't get stuck in our same categories of users. Teaching and coaching comes in from the CLM, and we actually also teach and coach each other. So that was also one of the synergies. We teach each other things. That we teach them about the use of information resources, for example, specific ones for their courses, for multilingualism, for example. And they teach us how to facilitate a meeting or how to moderate. I had a moderation course actually also the other day. That's I've done it for a while, but you always get new ideas. And now we have kind of distributed this knowledge, so we have more moderators on that as well. The young ones, anybody who's interested, we leave this open to anyone to participate in the Commons as well. And information resources and management, because of course, when you're in charge of library services, you want to make sure the library comes out. So the library's resources, especially. And so we're this is something that we need to keep working on, because it's not the traditional field, and librarians tended to think, but this is Commons and this is library. And I keep saying, no, the Commons is the library is the Commons. That's how we have to see it. We have to embrace it. It's one of our tools now. See it as one of our tools. In the very end, that's how I came up with it. It's a tool for you to bring out what all we do, and the information resources, to make sure that people get the right information quickly. Any of these, the mandates that basically we have as librarians and information management specialists, right? So by now, the Commons consists of events. That's what we started rolling with in 2018. We immediately started events. Some of the library talks that we would have called library talks, we rephrased them and we said, this is a Commons event now, because it fits better. And we geared them towards different audience, right? Not so much from the outside, but really targeted to staff and diplomats. And it immediately worked. Nobody questioned it. Of course, now there's a question, is the confusion good or bad? I'm not quite sure. But it seems to still help the causes, actually. So the events kept rolling in 2018, and then during that time, we developed some products and services that went around that, and I'm going to have some more examples of that afterwards. So a really big part of this Knowledge and Learning Commons was research and evaluation and monitoring. And I think also that's something that libraries don't often do. So we received, because of the input that we had from another service, money to hire somebody on these kind of issues, on management issues. And she started, at first there was a lot of research on what are other Commons doing, but to get things started, right? And basically to be able to provide to our supervisors, a more neutral opinion about a Commons. What is a Commons? And it's already in place. These things are already in place for a long time. So we needed this kind of justification. And then this colleague of mine, she started with a learning needs assessment. And this was done, of course, in a very professional manner. And what she did is she did all kinds of different types of surveys. And of course, with our interns, they were so interested in that, they all helped. We would have online surveys, we would have them in place as well. We had machines, okay, click yes or no after an event, smiley, non-smiley or whatever. But it was really all different types of surveys that we did with that. And especially it was focus groups. So we invited the different types of categories of users that we have to discussions. And there you could actually explain what this Commons is and what it's supposed to be even more of, and really get their learning needs from there. And in the end, this learning needs assessment came up with this hand, because there were 5 streams that they came up with that were the most asked for, actually. So the first one being communication, obviously. And we always thought, okay, CLM is providing all these management courses on communication, How could anybody want more? But no, people would like to have more. They would like to have it differently. They don't want to have to come to a course to learn about communication. They want to communicate and learn what they're doing. Right? Then innovation and technology, meet the future. That's a very big stream. SDGs, obviously, this is something that the diplomats wanted to have more of. It's how do we, governments, how do we talk about the SDGs? What are the targets? What are the statuses? How do you do evaluation and monitoring for the SDGs, for example? There are many difficulties with that, obviously. So we invite people, specialists on really specific issues concerning the SDGs to talk. And then the talk is usually like this here, I guess, about 30 minutes, 45 minutes presentation, and then it's question and answers. Or it's work groups also. You work in working groups on a specific SDG and you exchange about that. Conflict resolution and mediation, we were very surprised about that, but many people felt that was needed. I guess in times that are budgetarily difficult and when things change a lot, especially, we get new IT tools and then you have to change all the process with it, right? We had a new ERP. So conflict resolution and mediation became really crucial. And we also found out that the whole issue of well-being, staff well-being, was actually very important, and people wanted to have more of that. They wanted to know about how do I resolve my stress at work, but also at home, work-life balance. And you will see actually in December we're going to have one on the fear of flying that's coming from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. They fly a lot. And obviously this is a big issue. If you have a fear of flying and you have to fly several times a week and you go to those missions and then you go on the helicopter in times of crisis, when you're being shot at maybe, these are big issues, So we do these things together with, let's say, HR people who are specialized in that, psychologists and so on. And then languages and multilingualism also was very high on the list as well. And that is a quite easy one because the CLM just opened up their ways of doing things. Not only these the courses in classes, but more, like I said, for example, the language exchange, or at our cafeteria now we have a table, meet and eat, and it's in all different languages. So I think about once a week there's a day where it's all about languages. And then monitoring and evaluation strategy. Now after 1 year, we're reviewing everything. We're going back to, for example, the senior managers. They were also interviewed. All the senior managers having interviews again for us to find out, did this first year of implementation, because we had a housewarming in January 2019 then. So now we're a year into that. Did we do the right thing? Is the commons working for you? Would you use it differently? Would you call it differently? Anything is open actually for change, because this is how you have to go about these initiatives. If you fix it, as soon as you fix it, it becomes static, and the innovative approach is not there anymore. We learned that with a couple of things. We had a gender issue, gender champion initiative, for example, and we had no secretariat. We didn't have a focal point. It was all based on collaboration. Voilà. So for 2019, after the last the learning needs assessment, we came up with the upcoming commons activities, and we just have like regular flyers, but most of the things are also online. And we're not, as you can see, you always have the streams in the back so that people can propose things, and here you have the flyer for the month. And these are not a whole lot of events this month, because it's December, and they're going to kind of almost shut down. Usually the third week of December, people go on Christmas holidays. But we still have 4 events going to then. And you see what's really coming this month is artificial intelligence. So that's the innovation and technology strand. Then we have a really good one on leading change in UN organizations. It's a book launch actually, but we don't have to sell it as a book launch, and she's not going to sell the book there. It'll be available at the UN bookshop, which is not part of the UN. It's a commercial enterprise. But she will talk about it. And she's doing a tour around the world, kind of, and she asked actually to have her book presentation and talking about that right here. Catherine Bertini. So WFP is World Food Programme. She's a former executive director there. Then is this fear of flying there, which was surprising to me. And then shaping your career during the 4th Industrial Revolution. So it's really things that the staff is interested in, but the diplomats as well. They're also extremely interested in that, especially in anything that's AI, because you have digital diplomacy also, things that are being done differently, just like you have e-governance, you know. These issues are just up in the air, and they kind of connect, but then again you have to, I guess everybody has to focus on a different area as well, and first of all to figure out what are the others doing. And so this is always the space for exchange right there. So through all these, we have been creating a lot of new networks for the library as well. As you can see, we had 48 events now in 2019, with 2,485 participants. More women than men, but it's a very typical structure. Actually, it's a bit less here than, let's say, for the Learning Center. Learning Center has usually even more, higher percentage of women than men. And we partnered with 38 other services and institutions, which is really tremendous. For the library talks, I mean, we've been doing this for like 10 years. We might have about 12, 13 during the year, but this is 38 different partners, and sometimes we put them together. They wouldn't have collaborated otherwise, right? And new things come out of that, new synergies and new initiatives, and it's very innovative, the approach. Then, well, gender parity, but I'm not going to talk too much about that. I used to be gender focal point, obviously, so it's always my pet issue. Voilà, so we had a housewarming, and there you see this, it's a bit more formal, but on the left side, we were all kind of explaining, everybody was taking their turn in explaining what the commons is. Because, you know, when you're in an international environment, English is not necessarily our first language, neither our second, neither for some their third, you know. So people don't necessarily get that. I think for Americans, Canadians, I realized, and even Australians, also they know what a commons is. But like in the UK, it's also not necessarily the term. So we have a tendency to explain still. And where we want to get to, obviously, is just people come and use it, and it doesn't matter what it's called. It's the space where you can meet, you know, where you meet and you discuss. This was our former Director General. So of course, with all that always comes a big social media campaign. And this is, you know, I like whatever. So that's, our interns love these kinds of things, and they always take pictures. So everybody could do the frame, and then we had a part where they could have their own phrase on it as well. So we posted that stuff. And then this on the right side is also again in the events room, the same room, SDG Anonymous. The things, you know, they come up from the young UN. They realize that people don't want to talk about the SDG so much in our section because they feel, ooh, I don't know enough about it, and I should do more. For example, in environmentally friendly, you know, I'm staff of the UN and I'm not recycling as I should or whatever. So they have these meetings now, these SDG Anonymous, where, okay, admit what you're not doing or what you're doing, and we try to find solutions together, right? So even in our workplace, like I still have my own printer in my office, and I probably shouldn't, but you know, I should go there and then probably could find a solution together for me, right? Voilà. So these were actually events that were powered by, and that's what I meant. So we actually now open this space. People were very resistant to that. To just, you know, you have your event, and we host it in our library. We don't even say that. We give it a Commons logo. That's a requirement, but nothing else will talk about the library or about the Commons. You can pretend this is really, you know, it's happening in your space or whatever. You don't have to say that you've done it with us. That's a powered by. And then these are the products. So we came up with a podcast. It was something that our boss had always wanted to do, and our director. And it was a natural thing with these Commons events, because we realized, of course, some of these things you want to capture, you want to make sure that people listen to afterwards. And filming is sometimes not that easy, especially if they move around. That means you need to have a film crew, right? Otherwise, the event becomes static. If you just film like this one, it becomes more static. So a podcast is a great solution. Many people are using podcasts nowadays, and voilà, that's how we do it. And I think we have more than 10 podcasts already, and we started it only in the beginning of this year. And people are now also asking, well, oh, could I also do a podcast? Could I do it? So it just, once you get things started, people naturally will also propose, and they will want to participate when they see that it's easy. It's not. We don't put up any obstacles either, right? We will also try to do it in different languages when we can. So the conference primus, actually, that's something that's very good for diplomats, because with all this, we reached a lot of UN staff, but the diplomats, they come, but they're not coming in crowds yet. So we really want to reach out more to them. That's really our resolution also for the next year. And one of the products that we came up with was this a conference primer portal. Let's maybe put it this way, because the diplomats need to prepare for the conferences. They need to get the newest documents, the ones that are going to be discussed. They need to get the statements from the evening before for the next morning. And these things are on different types of websites. For human rights, you have it all on the High Commissioner's, on the Council's website, for example, but not necessarily in a very feasible or easily digestible form. You also have some NGOs that will produce like summaries for the next day, right? So you want to have all that in one shot, and then there are many, many different types of information resources online. So our idea is to have this online portal to preparations for documents, basically. And we want to do that again through the Commons. It's a Commons product, it's not just a library product, because it's something that that we will work on with the diplomats. We will have this network, or we already have, obviously started a network of linkages with some of the diplomats that are very much interested in that. Some who asked for that, and now we're going to publish that. And then we need to be ready, though, to also change and adapt it to what the needs are, and not to stay static. This is like very typical. It's still a library product, and you can see that. You have a lot of text, and you don't necessarily might not know exactly where to get into, right? You have a lot of options at the same time. As librarians, we tend to have a focus on completeness of information. That's what I found. Documentation centers are much more analytical, and so I think in our future, in any case, it's both. We need to have both. So this is going to be a product like that as well. But it's not online yet. That's why it's just a screenshot. And then, of course, we have these research guides. We had them on the important topics before, a research guide. They used to be called resource guides. So it comes from the back end, as you probably all know how that works, right? Research guides is what you call it, but it's basically a search across any of your online resources that you have, the catalog, the internet, whatever, and you pull them together. And so in normal research guides, we'll cover a topic really to its extent. Like if we have one on disarmament, it'll have all the different facets, and it'll get all the information in from the United Nations official documents to any of the books that are here, that are available, any of the databases, information articles from databases, and so on and so on. And it's all in a very large guide so that you can have comprehensive research. And this one basically is done within a couple of hours. It needs to be up like that. So this was an ad hoc product now, and we do it for each of the events, for the Commons, and that it's a new thing. It requires a different type of thinking for information managers as well. So for me, that was all very positive as well, because it's important for ourselves to go with the times and come up with different products and innovative approaches, be it just already for raising visibility and marketing ourselves, I think. So I think that's about it about the Commons. Did you understand what a Commons is? Yeah, I hope so. Do you have any questions?